What is up, YouTube fam? Robbie C here. Welcome back to Shape Your Game, where we talk about essential shots that every player should have in their game if you want to succeed. And we're kicking off episode 2 with a classic, the Anhyzer. But before we dive in, we have to ask the most important question of the day. How you doing today, Rick? You having a good one? In this series, we want to be discussing shots and sort of techniques that you should have in your game if you are looking to sort of take that next step, or if you've just been playing casually and you've decided, hey, I want to actually get better. Today's video is all about Anhyzers. And for those who are unfamiliar, Anhyzer is where you take the outside edge of the disc and you actually raise it up away from you. We talked about in episode 1, if you didn't have a chance to see it, where we have the disc on hyzer, which is that outside edge being down. The reason this is important is because hyzer, anhyzer, and flat shots can be thrown on both a backhand with your hand moving like so, and on a forehand with the disc coming through, also referred to as a sidearm. So we're gonna break this video down into 4 sections. First, why would you want to throw an anhyzer? Second, what does throwing an anhyzer do to the disc? Third, and probably the most important, how do you throw an anhyzer? And fourth, but certainly not last, when should you throw an anhyzer? First, why would you throw an anhyzer? If you're watching disc golf YouTube videos, then odds are you know that different discs or different molds, which is the sort of particular shape of the disc, have different flight characteristics. For instance, a pig is designed to go straight and then fade and be overstable and sort of finish in a certain direction, whereas the range is designed to go much more straight its entire flight. Both of them have a sort of thumb track feel on the top. Both of them are putters. But the differences between the two influence how the disc wants to fly, which means that there are really 4 things that we can do to influence the flight of the disc. The first is the mold selection. Depending on which disc we select is how the disc naturally wants to fly. Some discs want to fly straight, some discs want to go left, some discs want to go right. Thankfully, disc golf isn't a setup where it's just sort of the same shot over and over again. And if you are playing a course that you're throwing the same shot over and over again, double creek. Whew, that got tough. Then maybe you should go to a different course. The second way that we can influence the shape or flight of the disc is how we throw the disc. As I mentioned before, the reason we describe anhyzer as the outside edge of the disc being down is because I can throw a disc on backhand, I can throw a disc on forehand, I can throw a disc as a tomahawk, I can throw a disc as a thumber. How I choose to throw said disc is going to influence how the disc is spinning, which is going to also influence how the disc is going to fly. For instance, an overstable disc, such as the Swarm from Discraft, means that it wants to lean into whatever spin I'm putting it on. So for a right-handed player, when I'm throwing a disc on backhand, it's going to make the disc spin in a way that makes it want to go left. Thus, an overstable disc is going to want to go really far left when thrown on a backhand. Conversely, when I throw a disc on forehand as a right-handed player, that's going to make the disc naturally spin in a way that makes it want to go right. And an overstable disc is going to lean into wanting to go right. An understable disc wants to do the exact opposite. It wants to go against whatever the natural spin is being put on the disc. The third way that we can influence what the disc is going to do is by power metrics of the throw. This means how fast am I throwing the disc? How much spin am I putting on the disc? Did I keep the nose or front edge of the disc up, or did I keep it down? What was the launch angle of which I threw that disc? These are the mechanics which change from thrower to thrower most often. For instance, myself and Ricky Wysocki, a new Discraft player, could throw this exact same Swarm, both trying to throw it on a backhand. But I'll be honest, Ricky's gonna give it the beans a little more than I am. We're kidding, Mr. Crawford. He's gonna give it a lot more than you're gonna give it. These power metrics are definitely going to affect how the disc flies, which is why we sort of talk about them the least on this channel, because they all take time to change and adjust, and obviously we want to help you increase those numbers in a positive direction, but it's other variables that we want to look at so that anyone can adapt them and start applying them to your game. And the last metric that you can use to affect the flight of the disc is the angle of release. We talked about it, and while you're here the whole time is anhyzers. We talked about it, but you have flat, you have hyzer, and you have anhyzer. So let's talk what happens to your disc when you throw it on anhyzer. We discussed how certain discs want to fly a certain way, and we can sort of adjust the release angle. What adjusting the release angle does is it sort of adds in our own version of making a disc fly a certain way. If I throw a disc on hyzer, then it is more likely to lean into the spin that I'm putting on it, just like an overstable disc. Therefore, an overstable disc put on hyzer is really going to lean into that flight. Conversely, An Anhyzer release angle makes the disc want to go against whatever spin you're putting it on. Now this can be incredibly important, especially depending on the shot shape that the hole is asking for. So when I take a disc that is understable and I throw it on Anhyzer, that means it's really going to try to go in the opposite direction of whatever natural spin I'm putting it on. So there are really two dominant thoughts when it comes to throwing Anhyzer angles. The first is when you're doing angle adjustment, some people will teach that how you do angle adjustment is you're actually just going to do angle adjustment at your hips. What this means is that traditionally, I'm gonna be trying to throw as a flat, sort of keep this 90-degree angle from my arm, and how I'm going to adjust is if I wanna throw hyzer, which is that outside edge down, I'm going to simply lean in to the shot. And by bending at the waist, as the disc comes out, you'll see that boom, that outside edge of the disc is down. However, if I just come back to flat, boom, I'm throwing it flat. Thus, Anhyzers would be me leaning back into the shot, and therefore you can see that outside edge is up. For several people, this can be a start to the process, but I personally think that if you're just trying to throw soft Anhyzers, really feeling like the only way that you're gonna throw those Anhyzers is by leaning back into it, can create a host of really other issues. Which takes you to the second option, which is just sort of controlling it with your arm. Now to do so, this is sort of where I like to try to lean into things a little bit more, whereas I don't wanna have such an extreme angle, but I often feel that standing straight up with my back like so is not a very athletic position. When I think about if I was fielding in baseball or even playing basketball, those sorts of things, at really no point was I in active footwork scenario with my chest fully upright. I was always leaning into it, ready to go, sort of hovering over the balls of my feet. I think that by getting into this athletic position, we can think about what's happening at the release point of the throw. And there are two focus points that I think you can use to really help you hit those Anhyzer release angles to get a more consistent pop without feeling like you're sacrificing your athletic integrity to lean all the way back into the shot. Sometimes leaning back into the shot is necessary, but usually it's only on the extreme when we're throwing rollers. So if you're trying to throw these Anhyzer angles where you're trying to get the disc to release on a outside edge up angle, two focus points that I like to use are keeping the elbow up and out and focusing on the follow through. So here we are on the tee box. I would say most often why we want to focus on keeping the elbow up and out is because as people sort of lean into this, the only way that I throw Anhyzer's method is falling backwards. As I do so, it's really hard to feel like I'm throwing with power and still keep that elbow out and away to keep that space. So what's gonna happen is, as I go to throw the Anhyzers, I'm going to, as I fall backwards, I'm having gravity drop my elbow into me, which also means that I'm having to use extra effort to get that elbow up and out. And when it falls into me, as I rotate, that elbow collapses, the space disappears between my elbow and my body, and because of that, I'm rotating and the hand is more likely to sort of roll with me as I come through. As I get closer to the camera, you'll see this. My hand comes through, and as I throw, my hand rolls, which means the disc is going to slip out as I'm trying to hit that release point. When we're talking extreme angles, such as extreme hyzer and extreme Anhyzer, the key here is feeling the pop and that initial hit point out in front of me. Not, let's say, I'm looking straight at you. I don't want it here, but I'd rather it be out here. Because as I hit this point with some gusto, give it the beans out here, I'm going to then use the rest of the throw. The hit point is occurring here, and the rest of the throw is coming off. You can think about this as if I'm throwing darts. When I throw darts, I'm not doing this. I release the dart and then follow through. Release the dart, follow through. This release of the dart point is happening here, and then I follow through. So let's use 4 examples here. I'm gonna let the elbow collapse on this sort of throw, and I'm gonna let just the elbow fall into place and lean back and try to throw accordingly, and we're gonna see what happens on these release shots. What I've got here is Precious Child, which is a pig that's been really beat in. I have a range, then I have these 2 P1Xs. Let's start with Precious Child first. Once again, we're focusing on sort of not keeping the pocket space and letting this rotate in. Had to lean back, felt like I had very little control of what was happening on that shot. We got it to hit though. Here we go with the streamlined range. Okay, as I went to release the disc, if that wasn't a neutral to understable disc, it came out and was pushing pretty straight and out to the left. It only moved right because it was an understable disc that wants to go right with me. If I would have taken a neutral or overstable disc, it would have just held straight there and struggled. Our first P1X. Okay, you can see that these have that outside edge and they're holding the angle the entire time. Now, this does bring up an important note that I want you to look at when it comes to learning this shot. We talked about how discs want to do a certain thing and the flight metrics that you can put in based on spin, power, speed, all of that. There is a certain threshold that must be put into every single disc in order for it to start flying like it wants to fly. And for distance drivers, lots of folks actually never throw with enough gusto to get that flight metric achieved. And when you're using putters, lots of people, pretty much everyone, can get a putter to fly up to speed and get those numbers going. So therefore, if you don't get a disc up to speed, it's going to sort of not only not do what it wants to do, but it's going to lean against other things, most often making it more overstable and wanting to get to the ground because it never had enough gusto to get off and fly. All right, so as I said previously, this is an elbow spacing thing that I'm working on myself. So I don't have this mastered by any stretch of the imagination, and Coach Clint is making sure that we are driving the elbow, doing our thing. So we're gonna see what focusing on the elbow, trying to keep it out, what this does for Anhyzer release angles. Super interesting. We are able to get significantly more distance, which is nice. We are picking up a tailwind now, which is important to note for Anhyzers. Whenever you're throwing with a tailwind, everything's gonna fly more overstable. So you really have to commit to these Anhyzer angles because you're trying to sort of simulate something being understable, but the wind is making it more overstable. So you've got to commit to that hit. Once again, significantly more distance, but something that I'm noticing here is that I'm actually causing them to all sort of be with, I have a lot more height on them, which is interesting. So we're gonna try to stay in athletic position, keep that elbow out, and really hit that follow through. Yeah. There's a 280-foot hole, and we just put a putter right next to the basket. Okay. On that last one, we didn't get a hold of as well. It went pretty far. We didn't get a hold of as well, and I'm sure going back, I'm sure that my elbow dipped on that last one. This is something that I'm trying to tell you. I know this works because when it works, and I actually hit it well. But if you had 13 to 14 years of dropping that elbow in, I don't want you to be in my place. I don't want you to be hating yourself at night because you can't convince this elbow to just stay out. But you may be like me, and you may have an elbow that just absolutely hates success and wants to lean into old habits. You're not even gonna say die hard because they just won't seem to die. The next focus point, or the next tip, I think is actually super crucial for trying to find that consistency in Anhyzer angles. And that is focusing on the follow through, because when you start combining keeping the elbow out and really hitting that follow through, I think Anhyzer success is right around the corner for you. What are we talking about on follow through? Follow through, for a lot of people, they don't think about sort of the extra motion that's coming through. If we go back to the dart throwing analogy, if I'm trying to throw a dart and I just pop like so, it's not gonna have a lot of gusto to it. Where I really get the dart to pop is by finishing the shot, finishing down, finishing through the shot. And in disc golf, I think that oftentimes a lot of us fail to think about finishing the shot. We focus on getting so much to the hit point that once we achieve that, we sort of let off the gas instead of sort of pushing through. It'd be the same thing why we never see runners get to the end of a race, hit the rope, and whoo, good job. No, we tell them that they need to sprint through the other side. They need to push through the other side so that we can accelerate into the hit and gas out the other side. An Anhyzer release is trying to create a disc going the opposite direction of the spin we're putting it on, AKA creating a somewhat understable flight with whatever disc we're using. However, when a disc is thrown nose up, or with that front edge sort of popped up, the air brakes get put on it, which causes it to become more overstable. Similarly to how we talked about with the tailwind that we just threw in, how it was causing the disc to become more overstable. If I take a disc and throw it nose up in a tailwind, it's gonna fly very overstable, which means it's gonna wanna lean into whatever flight path I'm putting it on, which would be the exact opposite of what we're trying to accomplish with an Anhyzer angle. So what we wanna make sure we're focusing on is when you throw the shot, not sort of getting to the point and stopping. And a lot of people, what they don't realize is that when they do that, they're actually sending the disc straight out. They're sending it straight forward. They come into this hit point and then we push it out like so, which is why the disc sort of sails in a straight line or out and wide rather than leaning into that finish point. What it often is gonna feel like when you're learning this is that you're sort of trying to throw rollers. You're trying to yank them into the ground. And you have to practice with that to sort of learn what's the delicate balance of actually yanking it into the ground versus hitting that point and accelerating through to create your follow through, where you're trying to create a slash as if I was trying to draw a backslash across the screen. That's what I really want to think about and accelerating with the shot. So what does this look like with our powers combined? We're trying to create that elbow spacing and we're going to accelerate into the shot. Most often, how that should look for me personally is rather than finishing the shot like so, where I'm sort of planted and trying to fire back, that's gonna lean towards me launching the disc out and high. But if I focus on accelerating through to the other side, I'm gonna let that hand sort of feel isolated as I come through and spin me around the other way. Let's see if we can't get some good rips of focusing on getting to that point with the elbow out and then accelerate through and draw that extreme backslash. So you can see there that that was on way more Anhyzer and moving way further right because I focused on really accelerating to that point. That would be a case of leaning too much into the sort of accelerate through the hit point. So we want to find a happy medium. We hit our release point late, and this can be an issue of me trying to accelerate, but I'm turning my body too far forward. So when the arch comes around, I'm actually pointed in the wrong direction. So I need to sort of think about holding the shoulders back a little bit more as I go to accelerate into this point. There we go. You can see there, we accelerated. You could even possibly hear the snap and release of getting to the point and having it come out of my hand, and holds on that straight line the entire time. Let's see if we can go one more shot and not try to really lean into this last tip. You can see that we didn't really hit that on a ton of Anhyzer angle, but we really did get to that 10 o'clock release point and really pull through, which is why it held on that Anhyzer to flat for most of its flight. And then it just sort of settled at the end, which takes us to the fourth and final part of this video, which is when should you use this? One of the funniest parts about disc golf is that as you learn certain skills, there are opportunities where you're going to overforce that into situations where it's probably not the best idea. A forehand is a great example because for players who do not have a forehand or a sidearm, oftentimes because a sidearm is going to go the exact opposite direction of what a backhand's trying to do, you step up to holes like this where the basket is set off to the right and you're thinking to yourself as a right-handed player, yeah, I just gotta like throw a forehand. When the shot shape of the fairway, a forehand most often is going to go a certain direction and then fall off hard. It's going to have a short finishing when it starts moving to the right. So on a hole like this where I'm trying to get to the basket, but there's a singular tree in my way that's sort of blocking that forehand path, if I go in front of it, I'm going to end up very short. So a forehand in this situation may not be the best throw. I had to go around that tree in order to find any success with that zone. Enter the challenger from the left. That's right, ladies and gentlemen, the Anhyzer. I know that when I throw an Anhyzer, that disc is gonna go up and it's gonna move left to right for me as a right-handed player. It's going to do so a lot slower than the forehand necessarily is. So here, where I'm not trying to get really hard to one way or the other, I can actually throw a soft Anhyzer and let it just move right the entire time. Bada boom, bada bing. We're about 15 feet away from the basket. The second scenario that you're going to want to use Anhyzers is where you want the disc to finish flat. We've been throwing a lot of sort of extreme angles here when throwing hyzers. We were having them land in either a spike or sort of flip up a little bit. A hyzer flip is where you throw an understable disc on hyzer and it stands up to flat. An Anhyzer, how we get a flat flight is to take something that's really overstable like the swarm we mentioned from earlier, and we end up throwing it on Anhyzer, which means that if I'm throwing this disc naturally flat it is gonna wanna go, because I'm throwing it on a sidearm. Remember, Anhyzer doesn't just mean that you're throwing it on a backhand with that edge up. Edge up can still apply even on a forehand. If I were to take this swarm and I were to throw it flat right here on a forehand, it will wanna move to the right pretty drastically. However, if I keep that Anhyzer angle, that's forcing it to want to move left because I'm throwing it on forehand. This internal struggle should make it so that rather than staying on this angle the whole time, because it wants to move left based on the disc and the type of throw that I'm throwing, this should cause it to flatten out and land nice and smooth over by the basket. After all, a disc that lands flat is going to have a lot less chance of like roll away and skips and things like that. There you can see, I mean, it came out on an extreme amount of Anhyzer, but because the disc is really overstable and I'm throwing it on a forehand, it landed basically flat and just skidded right towards the basket. Which also goes to highlight that it's not always when you want the disc to land flat. Sometimes you can let the disc sort of come back. Flex shots are one of the coolest shots that you can throw in disc golf. And a flex shot is where you essentially get, you'll hear people describe it as a S curve or an S-shaped shot, which is where the disc gets a full flight. You get its turn and you get its finish. So what that ends up looking like for an Anhyzer is that if I threw it on Anhyzer, it would end up moving all the way this direction and then fight out at the very end. I can use this to follow the shape of a fairway. I can also use this sort of flex within itself to throw straighter shots. You can create those on hyzer flips as well, where it starts this way and it stands up and moves that way and then ends up finishing and fading. I have 3 different discs here. We have a Brody Nuke, we have a 12 Days of Discmas Zone, and then we have the Swarm. I would say that based on throwing these, the Swarm is probably the most overstable. The Nuke is going to have a lot more stability as well because it is that driver. We'll talk about drivers in just a second to close out the video, but I'm gonna throw all of these, trying to sort of throw them on varying degrees of Anhyzer, which is gonna hopefully let them flex out and get some fight back as well. Start with the Zone. You can see how it started, it moved left of that big tree and then it ended up fading out. It's not great for getting me close to the hole, but it does demonstrate that flex flight. So let's try the Nuke. I'm gonna be a little more aggressive as well, and there's a faster disc, so it's gonna pop out of this a lot faster. And thanks to that tree, it lands right next to the basket. Now this is the aggressive one, so what we're gonna try to do is we're gonna really try to just put it low on some zip. There you go. That one I sent a little too fast, so it didn't really have a chance to fight out. It's another thing that you can pay attention to is the more you commit to the zip and you throw these Anhyzer shots, if you really commit and throw them hard and flat, they're going to be lower, and the higher you give them, the greater chance they have to really shine on that Anhyzer angle and get a full flex out of the shot. But the more high you go with it, the more chance that nose angle gets up, which takes us to drivers and the sort of last case use for Anhyzers. Remember, we have to ask ourselves, what is the enemy of Anhyzer releases? And that is getting the disc nose up. So the distance drivers have this much larger rim, which makes them much more susceptible to being thrown nose up and a lot more nose dependent. And what I mean by that is when this front edge gets up and we're throwing it like so, the wind gets caught underneath and the back of the disc ends up acting as a sort of air brake, which really slows down the progress and makes it fly a lot more overstable. Now, I'll never forget my older brother taking me to play my first round of disc golf, and he had a Wraith in his hands, and we were coming from an ultimate Frisbee background where lids are traditionally classified as understable. So we were throwing a lot of stuff like so. And he had a Wraith, and he was like, yeah, in order for you to get maximum distance out of this, what you've got to do is you basically have to throw it. And he was trying to force Anhyzer releases to get these max distance shots. I think a lot of folks end up with discs that end up, for right-handed players, fading out for them left a whole lot. So their natural correction when they're learning disc golf is to throw a lot of these Anhyzer shots, and it just creates a natural swing path for them where they end up pulling down to the right all the time. This makes throwing understable discs very difficult, because if you do this on an understable disc, like this FD that's neutral to understable, even though it goes far, it doesn't go as far and never really gets a chance to shine or come out of that angle, and thus I miss out on max distance potential. However, if I take this Nuke, which is going to be overstable, and I try to throw it on the exact same line, notice, try to throw on the exact same line, but I didn't hit that well. I didn't follow through. I didn't get to my hit point, and that outside edge came nose up. We had a cross, just nothing about that went well. But you saw the issue very prominently stated in trying to throw max distance lines with overstable discs is that often when it's bad, it's really bad. I would say if you're trying to learn max distance shots and you want to put Anhyzer into the rotation, go with something neutral and understable like a Cicada, because then you don't really have to hit it on these extreme turnover lines, but you also don't have to hit it on an extreme either side. You can sort of play with how much angle you want to put on it to maximize that potential. So I hope that video is helpful, and I hope that the Anhyzer shot and this, I guess, mini documentary that we've put together talking about it is a shot that you can add to your game. It is definitely something that is intimidating to a lot of folks, and they don't try to add into their game. But then if they don't have a forehand, they sort of have to add it into their game, and we end up adding it poorly and get frustrated. But I hope that these tips can help you in sort of pointing out where Anhyzers fail, because trust me, I've failed throwing a lot of Anhyzers. So let me know in the comments if there are tips that you found that have been helpful for you, or what tip here was the most helpful. So thank you so much for watching. Hope you have an amazing rest of your day. Please make it fantastic for someone else too. But for now, we're gonna leave you with the birdies.